Hey everyone, I am Ashley Banfield, and we are digging deep into the truth.
Welcome to the Southern Depot. I am recording this from my mother's place in Florida on Monday, April 27th. I have so much to tell you. Seriously, so much. I am still tracking the Lynette Hooker case. I call it Lynette's story because she is still out there, missing. Brian Hooker fled the Bahamas, despite swearing he would never leave her until he found her. He insists she went overboard off the back of his dinghy in rough seas. But you know, piece by piece, we are tearing his story apart. If you are just tuning into this story, welcome. Hi. Please subscribe. It is wonderful having you along with us. Make sure to check out our past episodes because we have found so much that does not add up. Every single day, we uncover new details that directly contradict Brian Hooker's account of how his wife vanished in the Sea of Abaco, right off Elbow Cay in the Bahamas. To be honest, I could not list everything that does not make sense in a single hour. But over the next hour, you are going to hear some eye-opening things about Brian Hooker. We are going to dive back into the details of his story
And look at how he could have easily turned his live-aboard yacht,
called Soulmate, into a total ghost ship that could not be seen or tracked. We will get into all of that in just about a minute. But first, there are a few other updates I need to share. If you have kept up with this investigation, you probably recall the mystery of the blue dry bag. Basically, the search team who rescued Brian after he drifted for 9 hours, finding him on the shores of Marsh Harbor the morning after his wife went missing, noticed something that immediately seemed incredibly off. The strange part is that shoreside witnesses reported seeing him with a yellow dry bag that morning.
Yet the rescue crew who pulled him out of the water
and immediately said, "Let us go search for your wife."
One of those crewmen distinctly remembers an aqua dry bag,
and another responder recalls a royal blue,
almost teal-colored dry bag, which closely aligns with the aqua. A third rescuer has no memory of the color, while a fourth swears it was yellow. So we have a major contradiction when it comes to this bag. But we started wondering if there were actually multiple bags nested inside one another. Perhaps a smaller one was hidden inside a larger bag.
We actually discovered a blue dry bag inside the dinghy and shared photos of it in a past episode.
We naturally questioned if this was the very bag they saw. So I reached back out to the rescuer and asked him directly.
And he told me, no way, that is definitely not it. He remembers the exact texture.
He said it had a thick, plasticky feel. Not that soft nylon fabric, like a ski jacket. His memory of that royal blue bag is incredibly sharp. We are still working to unravel this dry bag puzzle and figure out its true significance. And I believe we will find the answers eventually. For now, it remains a loose thread in a very complex web, just waiting for the right moment to connect. Next, we need to explore some critical details about the onboard technology.
the sheer volume of tech Brian had on board. Hooker's small boat with Lynette right there on board.
And the chilling things he could actually pull off using that technology. See, he repeatedly swore to a friend he kept badgering day and night, right after Lynette supposedly tumbled off the back of the dinghy, insisting over and over that he had no idea how to install WhatsApp. Guess what? Brian Hooker was actually a veteran telephone technician and installer for AT&T. And honestly, that is just the tip of the iceberg regarding his technical skills. Just wait for it. Because Brian was highly skilled at hiding his digital footprint and location. We will unpack that in a second, but it is absolutely going to blow your mind. Once I uncovered what Brian did in the past to obscure his physical location and hide his coordinates, I was left completely stunned and speechless.
But we are getting right to that. Just bear with me.
We also uncovered details about his oar pins. Remember, he claimed he tried rowing, but one snapped off and vanished into the water. Right. I kept telling you that I could not find a single rowlock socket anywhere on the pontoons of that tiny dinghy, despite hunting through every photo on social media.
So it is highly unlikely he ever used those oars properly.
Maybe he just utilized them as makeshift paddles, but we finally tracked them down. The reason they were hidden was that those thick foam seat cushions were covering them. The exact same green flotation cushions he allegedly threw to Lynette. He claims he was trying to save her, but we do not know if she ever reached them. They are not even rescue gear. It is basically a pool toy. You can use it to kick around, but it will not keep you afloat for long. They actually have a surprising amount of bulk and weight, so perhaps he figured his excuse would be that a light life vest would have blown away in the wind.
Still, there were 2 proper life jackets sitting in the dinghy.
And we uncovered some fascinating news about those as well.
More details that completely dismantle his story, because there was likely a feature on those
Vests that could have immediately drawn attention from rescuers. I will explain that shortly. But before we go any further, I want to thank you. Your tips and leads have been incredible. If you know anything at all about this case, or are familiar with the area,
If you have any photos or videos taken on April 4th, looking out at the sunset from Elbow Key over toward Lubbers, you might have captured the anchored boats sitting right in front of you.
and there could be a vital clue hidden inside your photos. Write to dropdeadseriousinfo@gmail.com. Your identity remains completely confidential. But if you have any leads or know anyone who was traveling in the Bahamas near the Elbow Key area around those dates, specifically around 7 to 8 p.m. on the night before Easter Sunday, that Saturday night, April 4th, you or someone you know might be holding key forensic evidence. You might have captured a serious crime on camera or recorded crucial video footage. You could have witnessed something without even realizing its significance. Perhaps a flare, or confirming there was no flare. Share anything you have at dropdeadseriousinfo@gmail.com. Your support and tips have been incredible so far, and we are deeply grateful. If you prefer to stay anonymous, you can submit a report through CGIS Tips. It is an app designed for sending secure, anonymous leads directly to the Coast Guard. I know they will be incredibly grateful for any lead. Just keep in mind they cannot share tips with us, so you will need to send your information to both places. You cannot just submit it to them and assume that I will receive it. So, you need to email dropdeadseriousinfo@gmail.com or use CGIS Tips while making absolutely sure that you send a copy to me too. There is also a QR code displayed on your screen to make it easier. Additionally, there is a detail in the social media photos of Brian and Lynette's dinghy that we completely missed before. But my guest tonight pointed this critical detail out to me, and he is about to explain exactly why it is so crucial. You have likely noticed the tiny electric outboard engine that they used. Well, as it turns out, we have actually uncovered 2 completely different engines. Just a quick heads up, you might hear my mom moving around. She may walk through the background at some point, so please ignore that. Regardless, we are looking at 2 entirely different outboards on that dinghy. The older one from several years back is a light gray color,
while the more recent model they used is solid black.
There is a highly significant reason for this that we will reveal shortly. It is vital that we examine the psychological habits and behaviors of typical sailors, the gear they hold on to, and why hoarding is practically impossible when living on a vessel with limited space. Yet there are specific items that any sailor would absolutely hoard, and you are going to understand exactly why in just a moment. I also uncovered some critical facts regarding the actual speed and battery capacity of that motor. Up until this point, I believed we were dealing with roughly 2 to 4 horsepower, right? Yes, but it travels 2 to 3 miles per hour, leaving you with extensive runtime. It is far longer than the 4 hours I originally estimated. No, indeed, it is closer to 30 hours of battery life if you cruise at 2 to 4 miles per hour. At 4 to 5 miles per hour, the battery will last for up to 4 hours. So that explains the 4-hour figure I had in mind.
But you are about to hear about another speed altogether. How fast the dinghy can travel and how much operating time you get at that rate.
This matters because he claims to have drifted out there for 9 hours.
And I keep wondering what the hell he was doing during those 9 hours.
Because there is no way you drifted to Marsh Harbor in 9 hours.
It is physically impossible given the wind, the waves, the ocean currents, and the local tides. The prevailing winds likely would have pushed you straight into lubbers.
And it absolutely would not have taken 9 hours to wash ashore there.
Or to reach Marsh Harbor, assuming the wind was actually blowing as hard as you claimed.
Just wait until you hear the real specifications on that engine. It is absolutely critical.
Also, consider this. Remember how Brian claimed he did not know the tides during his phone call to his friend Blaine Stevenson?
He literally told him, "I do not know the tides, and you know the local currents."
And I called horseshit because he clearly detailed the ebb tide in his other message to the rescuers.
Well, we just uncovered another telling piece of writing from Brian.
Now, let's talk about sailing under a bridge. It is always a tense moment when you are squeezing a tall mast beneath heavy concrete.
You have to know your exact clearance height.
You must calculate the tides, or you risk snapping your mast completely off as you pass underneath.
Enter Brian. Are you ready?
Let's read this.
They had to ride the falling tide under 6 different bridges, supposedly 65 feet above the high water line.
But there were problems. A recent full moon pushed the tide levels significantly higher, adding almost another foot of water.
Imagine that. You obviously track the tides because you know exactly how the moon controls the water, man.
Besides, those bridges are rarely as high as nautical charts claim. In reality, some of those close passes were cleared by mere inches.
Followed by a shocked reaction.
That is a sailor who studies the tides and monitors the lunar influence.
He understands exactly how critical that data is when threading a tall mast under 6 low bridges.
So, once again, Brian, it is almost cute how you pretend to be clueless about the local tides and currents.
Really? And you have only been living there 9 weeks?
Let's be clear. Aside from one spot south of Nassau, this is the shallowest area in the Bahamas. The Sea of Abaco is notoriously treacherous for shallow water.
If you do not track the tides, you cannot sail here, especially not in a heavy keelboat.
Lynette even shared a photo looking straight up the mast, captioned, "Way too close for comfort."
But now, let us get to the real centerpiece.
I am deeply grateful to an anonymous whistleblower who decided to contact Lindsay and myself. They shared an eye-opening story about Brian Hooker's history at AT&T.
We have since verified this with 2 independent sources. Both confirm that Brian Hooker was fired from his position at AT&T. Not just once, not twice, but 3 separate times.
He clawed his way back and fought aggressively to get reinstated after the first 2 terminations.
The first firing, though, still an unverified rumor circulating among former coworkers,
Points to a physical altercation at a bar, after which he got rehired.
He was let go over a physical dispute, yet somehow managed to return.
It remains an allegation, of course. We cannot prove it.
We do not know for sure, but his fellow employees certainly gossiped about it.
As for the second incident, the exact reason remains unclear.
But the third and final termination, he was fired from AT&T for manipulating the GPS tracker on his work van.
He was actively trying to hide his movements,
concealing his coordinates from company supervisors.
Let us pause and let that gravity sink in for a long moment. Brian Hooker has the technical skills to understand how to manipulate the GPS on his vehicle,
ensuring that corporate headquarters could never pinpoint exactly where he was at any given hour.
Now, that changes everything, doesn't it?
And yet, this is the man claiming he couldn't install WhatsApp.
That is the excuse he gave his companion?
Nonsense. Not only could you set up simple apps, You are a professional telecommunications technician and installer by trade. So the guy clearly understood communications, but that was only scratching the surface of what he could do.
Lynette even posted on Facebook about how Brian was totally geeking out setting up a network on their boat.
Brian was highly skilled with technology. Eventually, Brian was fired, completely let go and terminated from his job at AT&T.
All because of how he manipulated their technology. My sources say the company held an emergency staff meeting just 3 days after Lynette vanished because she worked there too. And by all accounts, people absolutely loved her. She was incredibly kind and warm.
Everyone shared that exact sentiment.
They genuinely adored Lynette, but Brian was a different story.
For the most part, coworkers described him as a manipulative, incredibly difficult person.
In his position as a union steward, he was the point man handling disputes, meaning every single employee grievance had to pass through him to reach management. And apparently, he absolutely lived to pick fights with the bosses. His entire focus was on making management suffer, making their lives as difficult as possible. That is the consistent picture painted by his former coworkers. He would do absolutely anything. He would do whatever it took to push back against management, even if his antics ended up hurting the very colleagues he was supposed to represent. He was highly manipulative and cruel. That is the pattern that keeps emerging. He first met Lynette while working at AT&T. And at one point, in front of a room full of coworkers, he suddenly blurted out, "I am marrying the kid," casually referring to Lynette as just a kid. She was only 3 years younger than him, which hints at a strange, unsettling dynamic between them, to say the least. Maybe he thought it sounded playful and affectionate.
Or maybe it was a subtle way of putting her down, treating her as lesser.
As if she was somehow below him, just a kid. But that is only the beginning of what people observed. There is more. An insider who was incredibly close to Lynette revealed that
during one of the times she tried to leave Brian, and this happened over and over again.
Both friends and family confirmed a deeply troubling pattern. She would leave him, show friends photos of her bruises, swear she was never going back, and then inevitably return. During one of those times, she actually packed her bags.
She broke down in tears to a trusted source at AT&T, weeping as she admitted that Brian had completely emptied his entire 401k account.
And she was absolutely terrified, not knowing where to turn.
So we have a clear, documented financial crisis point in their relationship.
Dating back roughly 4 years, when he allegedly wiped out his own 401k savings.
But Lynette had a major nest egg. Her mother estimated her fund at $650,000.
In any investigation, you always have to look at the financial trail. It is not always the single deciding factor, but it is a critical piece of the puzzle. And Lynette had a very substantial retirement nest egg. Those close to her remember her crying, telling them, "I have packed up and left him again." He has completely squandered his entire 401k. In our line of work, we call that a highly damaging, highly suspicious piece of evidence.
Yet Brian has not been charged with anything.
The Bahamian authorities released him simply because they lacked the evidence to hold him any longer. But that does not mean new clues won't surface as the investigation continues. TikTok. Brian. This is exactly why Brian Hooker's technological background is so critical. Highly skilled with technology and incredibly manipulative with it. So the real question is, when you claim you do not even know how to install WhatsApp,
Are you?
are you hiding your true technical skills to conceal your yacht's location? I am running through dozens of different theories in my head, especially a detail shared by Blaine Stevenson, once a close friend of Lynette and Brian, who broke ties after realizing how many lies were hidden in that incredibly long, deceptive voicemail Brian has left for him.
Well,
A long, recorded conversation with Brian that simply does not make sense. There is a critical window of time when Brian and Lynette Hooker's luxury vessel, Soulmate,
completely vanished online.
Its connection to the satellites was cut.
Now, experienced sailors will tell you that happens. Sometimes heavy cloud cover blocks it temporarily. Or maybe a wider satellite glitch affects every boat in the area. But that was not what happened in this case. The exact moment the couple's satellite connection went dead,
Which I will prove with the official GPS ship tracking charts.
Blang, who will explain this in a moment, occurred at exactly 9:30 Saturday night.
If you choose to believe Brian,
He had already been adrift for an hour and a half. He claims he was drifting toward Marsh Harbor, unable to return because his wife took the keys and left.
the oar snapped.
and drifted away. Suddenly, he claimed he could not find her in the dark and rough waves of a stormy sea.
Supposedly floating away toward Marsh Harbor.
Yet, 90 minutes after that moment, the vessel completely lost its satellite connection. Why? How? Sure, some boats lose power and their systems shut down.
Okay, understood. But my guest is about to explain that this never happened on their vessel.
It never happened before, so why that specific night? It went offline at 9:30 at night and finally reconnected.
Want to guess when?
8:30 in the morning. Do you know what was taking place at 8:30 that morning?
Brian Hooker was being pulled onto the
Rescue vessel from where he was stranded in Marsh Harbor, and they headed straight back to his yacht.
returning him to the scene of the mystery for the
Very first time since the disaster of the night before. He stepped on board accompanied by a single officer from the Royal Bahamian Police.
And then the two of them disappeared below deck for a solid hour.
He is picked up at Marsh Harbor at 7:30, taking roughly 20 minutes to cross over to the vessel.
Which brings us to 7:50. They board until 8:50, remaining down below for an entire hour. Well, that timeline covers when things switched back on at 8:30. If that officer is there asking him questions, and he suddenly says, "Oh,
Hang on a second, I need to check something over here. Grab some lights and flip the power switch.
whoop," and just like that, it is back on. Another crucial piece of the puzzle.
Another critical piece of the puzzle.
But a far more experienced sailor than me. A true mariner is about to lay this all out and make much more sense of it than I ever could.
But let me tell you, this is incredibly bizarre.
Is that even possible? And if so, how? Can you turn your yacht into a ghost ship, yet keep your signal anchored in one single spot?
If you map this out, it is absolutely possible.
And that is exactly what comes next. Blaine Stevenson is here to break it down.
Using a small dinghy, could you rip the electronic navigation gear out of the yacht, throw it in, and anchor it?
Keep the power running, and then sail away to do whatever you needed to do. Perhaps heading into deeper water, or simply operating under the radar. You are going to hear all about that in just a moment.
But there is something else I need to show you.
TMZ obtained video from a neighboring boat operator. We do not know what kind of boat he had, but he was wearing glasses equipped with cameras.
Whether they were Google or Meta glasses, I am not entirely sure. But regardless, he was recording everything directly from his perspective.
And he calls out to Brian on the Soulmate from his own yacht. What stands out to me is that this footage was recorded on Monday, April 6th.
So it had only been about 24 hours since the actual incident occurred, right?
You would expect a husband to be absolutely frantic, knowing his wife might be lost at sea or stranded on some remote shore.
And instead, this nearby boater chats with Brian, who is calmly discussing how to raise his anchor and steer the vessel entirely on his own.
That is normally a two-man operation.
You need one person at the windlass hauling up the chain, while the captain manages the helm, maneuvering the boat off the anchor.
And doing that alone is incredibly difficult. Unless you have a remote windlass switch right there at the helm, which this boat did not have. And that is exactly what Brian is trying to explain to his neighbor.
But what struck me was that the other sailor
Seemed far more devastated and concerned about Lynette than Brian ever appeared to be.
For him, it was just business as usual.
He simply had to move the vessel.
See for yourself. What part of the key? I do not know how to run a boat. How do you even call the fire department? Bring my guy.
What are we even supposed to do?
I climbed over the side and paddled to Marsh Island.
I ended up on this rough shore, and we couldn't retrieve it yesterday.
The fire department actually dragged the dinghy up the beach.
So once high tide hits this afternoon, or later this morning when the water rises, I will head to Marsh Harbor. Will you guys be around today?
Yeah, we are staying close if you need help.
I might. I need to ask the guys, but I could really use a hand anchoring. I have never done this alone.
I do not have any switches, okay?
Right. What time do you think you will head out to do that?
He mentioned they would arrive around 11, right at high tide.
Okay. I am going to Hatches in Marsh Harbor because nobody helped me like they promised. Then I will come back to keep searching. I have no idea how long this search goes.
Well, so sorry. We can come out to assist you around noon if that works.
Since you are here, just keep watch. Let me know if I need to move fast if you see something.
Sure, but if I miss you, I am sorry.
I had to head out because I need to leave, and I cannot navigate without at least a foot of water.
Got you, yeah.
Okay, all right.
Special thanks to TMZ for that footage.
It is just, I don't know. To me, it is incredibly revealing that the neighbor filming this is offering apologies.
And Brian just casually brushes it off,
Saying his wife fell overboard, so he has to move his boat right away. Complaining that he is running a one-man show. Remember, this is only Monday, the very next day.
Lynette vanished Saturday night, and Brian drifted all through Sunday and overnight before being marooned.
While search teams hunted all day Sunday, now it is only Monday morning.
I just do not know. People process grief differently, but he is not even grieving yet. You should still be in absolute panic, searching for your wife. So many things make no sense.
absolutely none of it.
When you consider all the marine equipment Brian had on board and how well he understood the device in his hands,
Specifically his phone, the story crumbles.
So, keeping all this in mind, I had a very revealing conversation with Blaine Stevenson.
If you have been following this mystery, you know Blaine and his wife, Marnie, are also veteran live-aboard cruisers.
They have lived on their vessel for years. In fact, they have not even docked in 2 years. Right now, they are sailing near St. Martin, deeply troubled by this, since they were close friends with the couple.
Brian actually phoned Blaine and unloaded 40 minutes of raw, unfiltered information,
which they recorded because they simply could not write everything down fast enough.
But then,
During this massive, rambling call, they slowly realized what was actually going on here. Nothing made sense. Blaine's audio recording has actually become a crucial piece of evidence, both for our investigation and the police. He is also a highly experienced live-aboard sailor. So, I have been bouncing different theories and possibilities off him. Every single lead went through Blaine. Armed with all the new evidence I had gathered, I dialed his number and told him, I need your help piecing this together, especially when it comes to these ghost ship theories. Because after mapping it out with him, that scenario seems highly plausible.
This is my recorded conversation with Blaine Stevenson.
Speaking from his yacht currently anchored just off the coast of St. Martin. A quick word from our sponsor.
Now, I do not have a cat myself, but I know many of you certainly do. And if your feline basically rules your household, you already know they are far more than just standard pets.
They are tiny, whiskered dictators. So when you serve your little ruler dinner every single night, it really should not be a bowl of highly processed mystery meat. And that is exactly where Smalls comes in. Smalls cooks up fresh cat food using protein-rich recipes. It is completely preservative-free, made with 100% human-grade ingredients that you would easily recognize in your own kitchen fridge. And fellow cat owners are really noticing the difference. Once they switched, 88% reported major health upgrades, including much better digestion.
boosted energy levels, and softer, shinier coats.
Fewer hairballs, and, remarkably, less smelly litter boxes. Give Smalls a try and serve them real food that actually looks like food.
For a limited time only. Because you are an incredibly dedicated listener, you will get 60% off.
That is 60% off your very first order, plus free shipping. And get this.
You also get free treats for life by visiting smalls.com/DDS.
Again, that is 60% off your first box, free shipping, and free treats forever.
You cannot beat that. Head over to smalls.com/DDS. Blaine, do you know how long Lynette and Brian plan to stay in the Bahamas?
And when exactly did they arrive?
I believe they got there roughly 9 weeks ago.
I distinctly recall their Facebook post about the crossing. They had cleared immigration.
And I teased Brian about getting a haircut just to look presentable for customs.
So it has definitely been around 9 weeks now.
Did you have any idea what their itinerary was? Was it just a brief stopover or what?
Well, they are like most sailors. Their travel plans are essentially written in the tide.
Basically etched into the sand at low tide. They mentioned sailing down to Bekia and exploring the southern islands near our current location.
And that seemed to be the main focus of the conversations.
I was following on their social media.
Plus, we had exchanged private messages about meeting up somewhere down island.
But over the last couple of weeks, things seemed
to shift, and they talked more about returning back to Florida. But they did hold a cruising permit, correct? Can you explain how that works?
Right. When you clear customs in the Bahamas, and this has actually been a massive point of contention this past year.
The Bahamas had recently changed their entry policies, allowing them a 1-year cruising permit for the vessel.
However, the crew only received a 90-day personal visa.
So, when checking into a country, you register the boat.
Completely separate from the actual crew. And at any moment, local authorities can easily decide to admit the vessel, but reject the crew.
So, it is a dual registration process, but their vessel was legally cleared for a full 1-year stay in the Bahamas.
Their public Facebook posts clearly indicated, if my memory serves, that they planned on 90 days, though they openly complained that was too short.
Exactly, but they secured a cruising permit for a full year.
Right. There was also a Facebook post written by someone else, presumably a close friend of Lynette, given how the two of them were actively chatting back and forth on her public timeline. But the exchange was chilling.
Let me paraphrase what this person actually wrote back then. They wrote, "I figured you two would have murdered each other by now, but you actually look happy."
Looking back at that exchange in hindsight, it is absolutely terrifying.
You almost expect to see that friend interviewed on some news special very soon, right? Because that comment looks incredibly damning today. Then again, it is just social media. People make offhand jokes, but nobody would ever make a dark joke like that about my own marriage.
Every couple has their quirks, right? Friends might joke that I am going to fall overboard because of how clumsy I am. But they are not going to suggest that my wife and I would turn on each other.
So it points to a troubled history that we were all completely blind to at the time.
There is also a lot of online discussion about the advanced technology this couple kept on board. Let me catalog a few specific items I have pieced together from their extensive social media footprint.
For one, they actively documented having a drone on board, which becomes critical when we look at how a drone might be deployed during a maritime emergency in a moment.
They also possessed a 360 camera that Lynette used regularly. When held out, the lens software automatically erases the selfie stick from the shot, creating the illusion that a camera is floating right above you.
They possessed a specialized underwater camera.
It was likely that same 360 camera designed to be taken beneath the surface.
They could seamlessly transition from capturing a shot above deck to deep beneath the waves in a single take.
And Lynette was incredibly social media savvy, skilled at editing, and highly active online.
This was absolutely not a couple intimidated by modern technology.
Exactly. Out here on the water, my wife and I joke that we sit right on the demographic cusp.
We do not fit with the Young Cruisers Association, since we are both in our late 40s.
But we are certainly not part of the old-school paper chart generation either, right?
It is wild how almost everyone is active on social media. Yet they were far more tech-savvy than this, building an online presence long before we ever did. Brian actually built and wired his entire solar setup completely on his own.
I think that viral photo you keep seeing in the news is him putting two plastic pipes together.
But that was just the support frame for his side solar panels.
The thing is, he wore a high-end Garmin smartwatch on his wrist.
With active navionics charts on their tablets, they actually had all the proper navigation gear.
Honestly, they had better gear than we do. Let me tell you, I have called him out several times for that suspicious comment he made during that massive,
Rambling
40-minute audio message he sent your way. Or,
at least that long phone call where he explicitly told you something along the lines of, to paraphrase his words, I do not understand the local tides or ocean currents. But look, you are an experienced live-aboard sailor. You do not navigate a deep keelboat through the Sea of Abaco, which is 4, 5, or 8 feet deep, when your boat draws 4 feet, without masterfully tracking the tides and currents. Am I wrong? Exactly. You simply do not navigate those shallow waters blindly. Maybe you stay anchored for a few days and temporarily lose track of the cycles, right? If I have been anchored there for weeks, I already know the depth is safe, so I am not constantly checking tide charts. I do not need to check the daily charts.
But he was actively navigating in and out of that shallow zone that very afternoon.
He relocated his vessel from Tahiti Beach back to his anchor point that same day.
Now, I am not certain if he took the primary boat all the way down to Tahiti Beach. He claimed he only took the smaller dinghy down there. But the records show he was anchored further north, near the Firefly Inn, raising his anchor at 11:30 in the morning. And 20 minutes later, he dropped anchor less than a quarter-mile south, right off the Abaco Inn, from where you can easily travel further south to Tahiti Beach using the small dinghy, and then make the entire trip back, docking the dinghy right at the Abaco Inn. So the reality is, he was patrolling that western shoreline, a tiny half-mile stretch. It is clear. And here's the detail that really bothers me, which we discussed before. Around 9 or 10 that morning, the person filming him for TMZ heard Brian tell him that he needed help pulling up his anchor to keep a foot of clearance under his keel. Clearly, he was waiting on high tide. Yet 10 hours later, he acts clueless about how tides work during our call. Then, barely an hour after speaking with me, he contacts Search and Rescue, suddenly referencing ebb tides and specific landmarks like Matlow's Cay and Montage Cay in his message. In a single day, he understood the water, then played dumb, only to show total nautical awareness, again, within a 12-hour window. Exactly. It is incredible how he mentions the ebb tide after claiming he does not get how tides work. It makes absolutely no sense. But like we noted back then, something is off. When we taped that conversation, we only wanted to help a friend make sense of it. But after searching for Lynette for 3 weeks, listening to that tape tells a completely different story. He was basically rehearsing his alibi on you, right? I feel like I was totally being used in that moment. Maybe not to get taped and broadcast to the world. But he was definitely test running his narrative to see what people would believe. Look, here is what strikes me as odd, and I have seen my share of cases. So I know how investigations work, assuming a crime actually took place here, which we do not know yet. Yet there is an active criminal investigation. That was absolute verbal diarrhea, if I ever heard it. Usually, someone searching for their missing wife does not ramble for 40 minutes straight about trivial details. They simply do not have the time.
On that same note, let me ask you, Brian has a drone, right?
Is not a drone the ultimate search tool?
You tell the rescue team, I have a drone. Let us fly it and scan the shoreline, especially given how the timeline looks, right?
So he was out with the search and rescue crew early that morning.
Afterwards, the rescue crew brought him back to his boat, but he still did not have his dinghy.
Meaning he was stranded on that vessel all Sunday night and Monday morning.
Until they finally brought back his dinghy
And helped him raise his anger.
So he could head over to Marsh Harbor.
How many times did he fly it, right? If I were trapped on that boat, I would have been radioing everyone on the cruiser's net.
Honestly, I cannot point to one single action of his that makes any sense to me. But he had a drone, and he is extremely tech-savvy. You would think he would fly it.
You search, and you keep on searching.
I cannot prove he did not launch it, but he never mentioned doing so to anyone.
Right?
I can tell you this for a fact. The drone was never part of that initial search.
I talked to both of the men who were with Brian Hooker on the morning of the disaster.
And not once did he carry that drone off his boat to the rescue vessel and offer to launch it. Like, let us head over to the scene and scan the area. He did not say, hey guys, let us use my drone to search.
He never even brought it up.
He did not grab the drone at 8:30 in the morning, bring it onto the rescue boat, and say, let us get this thing in the air. It was never mentioned.
Honestly, there was a part of me that,
As you were saying that, I thought, well, if it was incredibly windy, maybe you do not want to fly a drone.
but I keep thinking back to the interview with the witness who spoke to him the following morning.
They could hear each other perfectly clear.
The air was dead calm, his boat was not drifting, and the water was like glass.
So he easily could have launched it then. Instead, he chose to spend an entire hour on the phone talking to me.
I mean, sure, we are friends who used to go boating together. But to me, finding out he left Carly a quick voicemail, but spent 45 minutes talking to me is just bizarre. Yeah, it felt wrong, and Carly was highly unsettled by his tone.
She described it as cold. Just, your mom fell in the water, catch you later.
Zero panic. No real worry, fear, or attempt to console her. Nothing.
According to Carly, there was absolutely none of that.
Exactly.
And the timeline makes zero sense. I mean, he clearly had a working phone. In his own recording, he admits he had his mobile on him. Honestly, we are at the point where we just cannot believe a word he says. Yet, we know his cell worked enough to call Carly.
To call me, log into Facebook Messenger and message Dan.
Right? The technology was right there in his hand. Why did he not use it to alert other boaters nearby? He absolutely had the power to do so.
Before we move past this, we really need to look at his phone and overall technology.
Look, the guy is highly tech-savvy. He worked for AT&T as a telecommunications technician, installing and repairing lines.
He even custom-wired his own vessel. He knew marine electronics inside out.
Remember that text you uncovered from Lynette, where she says,
Hey, Brian is geeking out, busy setting up the boat network.
the man understood cellular technology inside and out.
Yet,
He drifts toward Marsh Harbor for 9 hours, holding a phone that literally displays a message at the top saying, emergency calls only, without a SIM card.
And all you do is press send.
Sure, maybe you get hit with roaming fees because of your American plan, but that emergency call is going to connect, even if you do not have a working SIM card.
An experienced tech guy would absolutely know this.
I actually reached out to a representative from Cricket Wireless to make sure I had my facts completely straight. And they confirmed you can still connect to their network. Right?
If you want to upgrade your data plan, that call will still route through a roaming network straight to Cricket Wireless to process it.
So, drifting out there for 8 hours. And again, if he actually attempted to dial out or call for help, he has never mentioned it. And that is the very first piece of evidence you would offer up. Sharing your outbound call logs does not compromise an ongoing police investigation. You just say, look,
I tried dialing 911. Even if it did not register, here is proof.
I desperately tried to dial out.
I tried reaching Lynette. I tried everything, but the records are blank.
Then you show me a photo of your device with no SIM card, clearly displaying emergency calls only at the top.
Yeah, I had it until it got damaged. So now I am using this backup phone. And I immediately contacted my provider and said, hey, I have this locked device from a different network. My primary mobile phone just fell into the ocean. Can you convert my physical card to an eSIM and activate this device? It was working within an hour.
Sure, I lost all my data and apps, with no access to past text conversations or my personal files, but you are instantly back online and connected.
In under an hour.
If I were a betting man, I would say anyone in the telecom industry would know exactly how that works.
Absolutely, especially a guy with his background.
I mean, it is all public record. If you search the legal case of AT&T versus Brian Hooker, you will find he was fired for disabling the tracking systems on his company vehicle.
I have no idea how to do that.
But you see, he definitely knows his way around an AIS transponder and his marine radar setup.
Honestly, he knows far more about yacht electronics than I ever will.
He is actually the one who taught me about marine systems.
He always told me to trust my onboard navigation tools.
To this day, I credit his expertise for helping me survive a major hurricane out on the open water.
So yes, the man is incredibly skilled with technology.
Let us look closer at the details of his termination from his job at AT&T,
where he was caught tampering with the satellite tracking device on a company vehicle. That points to someone actively trying to go off the grid.
We are talking about a person who knew exactly how to blind a navigation receiver to vanish. When you apply that to this case,
things get highly disturbing regarding his actions after the final photograph was taken of him. Snapshotted right at 7 p.m.
presumably heading to the dock to board the small dinghy with Lynette,
only to show up nearly 10 hours later on Marsh Harbor, spinning an absolutely unbelievable tale.
Let us consider how someone could have actually reached the main luxury yacht with his wife. Maybe they secured the small boat, climbed up, and everything went wrong, though this is pure speculation.
Right. I cannot prove any of this, but if it is true,
Is it possible to turn your boat into a ghost vessel, leaving the transponder running on the anchor dinghy while you sneak out into the deep sea to do something dark with the yacht?
That tracking system needs 12 volts to run.
I would need to look up his exact equipment model.
But with his transponder system, is it hooked up through the standard NMEA network?
If it is integrated into the entire electronics array on his sailboat, and depending on how it gets power, I would need to know if it is a Garmin or Raymarine setup.
But at the end of the day, these vessels run on simple 12-volt networks.
A few use 24 volts, but basically everything just plugs in. I am confident there would be a digital record of the Starlink satellite terminal losing power
When they transferred it to the yacht.
If it was disconnected from the smaller craft, it would register as an offline alert.
Just like his transponder, it would instantly show as disconnected.
As for the rest of the navigation here, that is just a matter of manually flipping off each piece of equipment. I could easily take my own vessel completely dark, yes. To answer your question, it is possible, but the system logs would prove it. For instance, my Starlink app will notify me if I experience a tiny signal drop just minutes ago.
I will see it right on my mobile device if I unplug the antenna to relocate it somewhere else.
That is going to be a tiny blip on the screen, and someone needs to investigate it. If you analyze his AIS tracking data, it shows his yacht never even moved.
But when you dig deeper into the My Ship Tracker logs, you clearly see his AIS system went dark at 9:30, maybe 11, I do not have the logs right here, but definitely by 9:30 that night. So, on Saturday night at exactly 9:30 p.m.,
his vessel tracker suddenly goes dead. not coming back online until 8:30 the following morning, right around the very moment the search and rescue vessel pulled up next to Soulmate and tied off.
And he stepped aboard his yacht. For the first time since the disaster struck. Something about that timing is incredibly suspicious. That anomaly immediately grabbed my attention, prompting me to start digging back through his historical logs.
I wanted to understand his normal routine. Do captains usually shut down their transponders at night to conserve power?
But when I reviewed his tracker logs from the previous month, his vessel had never gone offline for more than 2 or maybe 2.5 hours.
Blaine, remember, nobody was even supposed to be on board that boat at 9:30 that night.
By 9:30, he had already spent an hour and a half drifting out toward Marsh Harbor,
without ever reaching the Soulmate. So, what exactly went down at 9:30 that night on board that yacht? When nobody was even there, to make it go dark, only to magically power back up right when he steps aboard with rescue crews the next day.
And that brought me right back to my theory about whether they normally shut it down to save battery.
I was not certain.
So I checked the logs to see if it stayed running during other nights.
It turns out his battery bank is more than capable of running that transmitter all night.
You do not see any pattern of them switching it off on a nightly basis,
which proves they keep it running every single night.
Meaning his onboard power system easily handles that electrical load overnight.
The system is not going to just shut down on its own. Now, when it comes to the technicalities of how satellite tracking interfaces with his system, the Coast Guard knows far more than I do. But analyzing his actual logs, there is an undeniable, glaring difference on that specific night compared to his entire tracking history. I cannot connect all the dots myself because I lack that level of sophisticated technology.
I have some decent seafaring skills, but nothing quite this advanced.
It makes no sense how suddenly, at 9:30 that night, the power system suddenly failed, when on any other night it managed the load without issue.
Why would that entire vessel shut down at 9:30 that evening? When he was supposedly drifting past Lubber's quarters, maybe firing off emergency flares at that exact moment.
It is highly suspicious, Blaine, and bit by bit, the evidence is revealing just how absurd his alibi really is.
Entire online communities are investigating this. I mean, we stumbled across a group on TikTok that actually uncovered some of these critical details.
These people are digging into metadata far beyond my own capabilities, operating at a high-tech level like Brian.
Keep in mind, this guy uses an electric motor on his dinghy. He has actually gone through a few of them. So his entire lifestyle revolves around using modern technology. He is not your average 59-year-old looking for an old-school outboard. Those two-stroke engines are not even sold in America anymore. He is not some old-school sextant kind of guy. He is a smartwatch guy. The type who controls his boat with his watch. When you live that kind of high-tech lifestyle, it is difficult not to leave a digital exhaust. I believe that was his phrase. Personally, I am not tech-savvy. If I tried to go completely dark, I would mess it up. Because my boat has far fewer electronic systems to worry about. For me, those battery logs tell everything. If I were investigating, I would look there. Out here, we manage our power systems down to the hour. To know exactly what we are consuming. Can we run the water maker? Can we wash dishes? Can we turn on the hot water?
Every cruiser tracks their power draw and what drains the system, and all of that is logged.
It would be incredibly revealing to look at that. What actually scares me is seeing what his onboard battery bank did during those night hours. Was it a slow, steady drain? Indicating nobody was on board until sunrise when the solar panels started charging it back up, or did we have distinct power events?
Did someone step back onto the vessel? Take a quick shower and run the water pump? You would instantly see that energy spike. Did they head below deck and flip on the cabin lights?
There is no hiding a water maker cycle or a warm shower. None of it.
Usually, if I boarded my sailboat after a full day out or returning from shore covered in salty sea spray, I would rinse off at the stern because yachts almost always have a small,
convenient washdown shower nozzle right there on the transom.
Or I might go below deck to one of the heads for a brief shower,
keeping it short to save fresh water. But even a quick rinse registers.
It shows up.
Exactly, and we configure our live-aboard boats differently than a standard charter yacht.
So when we finally return from an evening out or a long day on the beach, we step on board and systematically
flip on the anchor light if we forgot to do it before heading out.
Next, we power up the water heaters on both sides because we use separate heads.
We switch on those water heaters to ensure we both have hot water. Then we hoist the dinghy up.
On our boat, an electric winch would log that load.
I believe his davit was manual, but plugging in his electric outboard would instantly draw a noticeable current.
That power log would capture the event immediately.
Plugging in that outboard motor would register. You are right.
Absolutely right.
But again, that assumes they actually made it back to their catamaran, Soulmate.
That dinghy was not out there bouncing around in 2 to 4 foot seas. That did not happen. The weather was calm.
So,
if they reached Soulmate together, there must be power spikes from simply boarding and going about their normal routine.
Right, yes, absolutely.
Honestly, I can tell you the exact moment we last stepped aboard our boat. It is that definitive.
We have to. Eventually, we just run completely out of power.
To be fair, Brian and I share those exact same bragging rights. We have not touched a dock in just as long, right?
He has not moored at a dock since he last spotted me.
We have only made landfall once since we saw him, and that was just to pull a generator off our boat, drop it, and immediately depart.
Man, I do not know how you manage that.
My only constant thought is finding a nearby dock just to fill up our tanks with fresh water. Yet somehow, you are completely avoiding that struggle. Honestly, a lot of that comes down to fear, knowing the only real threat to a sailboat is running aground. So, the more you keep away, the safer you are.
And that really highlights a critical point.
There is plenty of speculation on the internet claiming he moved his yacht, Soulmate, in the dead of night.
I have been dissecting that theory, turning it over in my mind to see if it works.
But he could not possibly navigate
those tricky channels without leaving digital tracks on a GPS device.
You need precise navigation unless you have memorized every inch of the route. I guide my vessel at night, every single night, purely from memory. I never rely on marine electronics. Never.
Granted, that is a lake I know inside out, but they spent 9 weeks there.
The Abaco area is quite compact, and even the channel out is relatively narrow.
But let me ask you about sailing that yacht. It is a 46-foot catch, right?
What does it draw? Around 4 or 5 feet? It is actually a sloop, meaning it has a single mast, to be precise. So, I heard rumors that it was rigged as a catch, but that is just hearsay. Fair enough, but what is your guess? Does it draw 4 or 5 feet? I suspect 6, and 6 feet of draft is deep for Abaco. Yes, it is a Hunter 450 passage model. Because of that, I can easily verify the exact draft right now. Right, so he needed local knowledge of the area because of those shallow 5-foot spots.
At the end of the day, you cannot fight the ocean floor.
If your boat starts scraping against the bottom, you will tip over. Striking your keel against a shallow reef means capsizing and calling search and rescue.
Plenty of visiting sailors struggle with those treacherous Bahamian waters.
What are they? Tiny rock formations hiding just below. They are mapped out, even if the local depth reads 6.7 or 4.5 feet. A hidden rock or a coral formation will be plotted on your charts.
We call those bommies, right?
Bommies, sure. I usually say reefs, but let us get back to this.
If his goal was to transform that vessel into a ghost ship,
my question for you is simple. I cannot explain the mechanics, but my instinct tells me it is possible.
Is there any way to tear out the electronic components, the navigation finder?
Completely off the boat. And perhaps
Rig those electronics inside the dinghy, anchor that dinghy right next to you, and connect it to a 12-volt battery so the tracking signal stays completely active.
Just leave it in the dinghy and then pull your anchor.
You transform the vessel into a ghost ship, slipping away into the pitch black for maybe 9 hours to do your business.
then you return to retrieve those electronic guts.
The very hardware that keeps broadcasting your location, making it seem like you never even moved from that spot.
Your GPS coordinates keep pinging from that exact coordinate. Only they are coming from the belly of a dinghy instead of your main vessel. Is that possible? With a Starlink Mini, it would be incredibly simple to pull off.
If he was running his anchor alarm on a tablet,
And we believe they used a pink tablet for that system, you would just toss it into the dinghy.
The alarm never triggers.
it would report that they remained there the entire time.
Of course, the AIS tracking had to go dark, and it did. But you are asking if a vessel can hypothetically just vanish off the radar like that. I am analyzing every single system. If he was using a Starlink Mini running on 12-volt power, or even a Generation 2 system with a special adapter,
He could easily hook that up to 12-volt power.
so his internet signal keeps broadcasting from that same spot.
His anchor alarm continues to register in that exact spot.
Any remaining devices on board would just be personal handheld electronics.
If you relocate all of those to the dinghy, then yes, it works.
The only variable I cannot fully account for is the AIS. But during that specific window, the tracking went completely offline, at least as far as ordinary civilians like us can tell. Still, I have to assume the resources of the United States government far exceed anything we have access to.
They likely possess surveillance technology that goes way beyond what amateur sleuths can uncover right now.
At least I hope they do, because masking a location feels like something that is highly plausible.
Especially for someone previously fired for manipulating GPS signals to spoof the location of his own work van.
That suggests a very specific pattern of behavior.
And the technical skills to execute it. Hypothetically speaking, he clearly knows much more about this than I do, right?
He is exactly the kind of technical expert we would usually consult for answers.
If he were not the actual suspect under investigation.
And that is the core of the mystery for me. He understands this system better than I do, but looking at my own boat, I can map out exactly how he pulled it off.
Let us pivot to another crucial piece of evidence.
And by the way, I keep glancing at your background. Is that Martinique behind you?
What is that view off your stern?
I can see lights flickering in the distance. Oh, it is St. Martin.
Yes, that is sandy ground, St. Martin.
Unbelievable. I really wish I was there right now.
We are heading to Anguilla, St. Bart's, and then Martinique over the next month.
You should pack me in your bags. Come on down.
Do not tempt me. Now, let us address the next major issue on my list.
I have been analyzing the timeline regarding those missing oars. And you graciously provided the official manufacturer specifications for the exact model of dinghy they purchased. And you actually pointed out to me that those specific oars and pins only fit that exact dinghy, meaning you cannot just grab any random oar and use it on that boat. You must lock those pins into those receivers, right? Into those custom receptacle holes.
And I could not find the receivers for those oars anywhere because I kept looking in the middle of the boat.
Because they are not even there. Thank you. Explain how the oars work on their dinghy.
Right, so the Boss 8.5 dinghy actually has its oar locks placed way back near the engines.
If you look at the photo, which we will display on the screen right here, there are two small silver metal pieces on either pontoon, roughly 1 foot from the back of the dinghy. That is way in the back, by the way. For rowing pins, that is incredibly far back. So you would insert those pins there, sit down on the bench, and row the vessel backwards. Right? This means the bow, the pointy part of the boat, is actually behind you while you row.
Now, the reason I began investigating this in the first place is because Brian is a highly skilled painter. He painted this vivid picture of trying to row the dinghy only for the oar to suddenly snap.
I can easily picture that scene. Right? As fellow boaters, we can all visualize that.
Until you examine his actual dinghy. And then you realize, wait, where are the receptors even located?
Well, because they are hidden beneath the seat cushions they are constantly sitting on.
So I checked with the manufacturer and finally found the details.
Then, scanning old photos of their vessel, I noticed the pinholes were there, but the bench was completely gone.
They had removed that bench right from the start.
So now I am trying to piece this together, thinking, okay,
He claims he tried to slide the oars into the pin locks and somehow snapped one.
But how exactly was he rowing without a bench or any place to sit?
and that got me thinking about something else as well.
If you are searching for someone in the water, like those man overboard drills we all practice constantly,
You absolutely never take your eyes off that person, right?
So you would never want to row backwards toward a victim you can't even see. And that is when it hit me. This boat simply was not designed for that.
You have literally covered up the holes those pins must go into. Think of the precious time it would take to set everything up just to snap that pin.
In that same amount of time, you easily would have found those 2 life jackets and your anchor.
By accident.
Just by tossing gear out of the way to set up that exact scenario he described to me.
Right.
To break a pin inside the receiver like that, you would need to be seated on a bench rowing. But there is no bench. You would have to be kneeling, except that damn anchor blocks everything.
So, that heavy anchor you are struggling to shift would be the first thing you think of throwing overboard.
Exactly. Every piece of safety equipment is buried, and looking at the deck of that dinghy, it is always a mess. There is just clutter everywhere. I mean, we are all guilty of it. Honestly, I probably have 2 bags of trash in my own dinghy right now.
But you wouldn't actually kneel down there.
Turn your back on your wife. Drop the oars and try to paddle kneeling backward when you could easily kneel at the bow and paddle forward, like you are on a stand-up paddleboard.
Let's also look at what lies directly behind him while driving. You are holding onto the throttle of this small outboard motor.
We have combed through plenty of social media posts. But you notice that the hookers have used 2 entirely different electric motors on the back of their dinghy, which suggests there is likely a spare on board, because, as you rightly pointed out, mariners do not just throw gear like that away.
It is critical equipment.
It might be stashed in the engine room. A second outboard should be on that vessel. Right, so I do not know the full history of that motor. I actually stumbled onto this while debating in your comment section early on, back when everyone was going back and forth over the ignition key. And you can pull a safety key on an outboard and still have it run. And I was explaining to people that this was electric.
So I started pulling up photos to prove my point.
And that is exactly when it hit me.
I was looking at 2 completely different motors featured in 2 separate social media posts.
So, the first one had that signature gray and orange torpedo design, which made me believe it was exactly that.
And then, the newest one I spotted looks like an NT300 unit.
I cannot zoom in enough to read the exact numbers, but as far as I can tell, they have definitely used 2 different versions of electric outboards. And honestly, we do not just discard gear out here.
We just do not. Maybe he actually did.
Of course, that is pure speculation on my part, but personally, I would always keep a backup. When you are living aboard, having a backup of everything is vital, especially when it comes to propulsion. An engine is absolutely critical. This is not some optional luxury or extra treasure. This is essential gear. You would never throw that away. Now, look, I am not saying they did not. Maybe they did. But there should really be one of those spare motors on that boat. And if it is missing, that points to a serious problem.
And since you brought it up, thank you for sharing the specifications on that potential NT300 motor.
I have been arguing all along that a small electric motor like that only does 2 to 4 miles per hour.
But there are actually a few different variables regarding how fast you can travel and how much power you drain. So, the faster you run that motor, the less time you can spend out on the water. But go slower, and you can keep running for much longer.
Do you have those numbers handy?
I have the specs right here, but I would love for you to walk the viewers through it.
Exactly. Every motor has a specific power curve that dictates its most efficient operating range. And the NT300, if I recall, runs on a 36-volt battery setup.
That is what the specs say. And what does that mean in this specific situation, particularly with a lithium battery?
The reality is, you run at full capacity for the maximum lifespan of that battery, and then it just suddenly dies.
Just like your cordless Ryobi drills, right? It is not like those old flashlights where you can smack them a few times to squeeze out a little more light. Once that power tool battery drops to 0, it is dead. When the power is gone, it is completely gone. There is no warning.
So, with that lithium battery pack for the NT300, if he has been running it for years, he is going to know exactly what his maximum range is, right?
Yet we still do not know his exact battery capacity.
Because his previous Torqeedo setup used a simple slide-in battery pack, right? Meaning you could easily calculate his total available power.
But the NT300 relies on an external power cable. You either connect your own custom setup or their official battery pack. It is a 36-volt system, meaning he could even run it off 3 car batteries. Now, his small dinghy could not support that weight.
But we cannot accurately calculate his range, or set a hard limit using just that electric outboard. Because he could have used any battery configuration.
Looking closely at the specs, if you keep it slow, at what they call low trolling speed.
If you travel at 2 to 3 miles per hour, which is likely his average speed, you get 30 hours of running time. I originally assumed only 4 hours maximum. But 30 hours is highly significant for this timeline.
Now, if you are rushing, or if you are trying to escape or cover your tracks, you would push it faster.
Stepping up to cruise or mid-power, you are moving at 4 to 5 miles per hour.
It is still relatively slow, but faster. But now, your battery life drops to 4 hours.
It plunges straight to just 4 hours. That depletion rate is incredibly rapid, right?
And if you run at full throttle,
hitting 6 to 6.5 miles per hour, you would reach Marsh Harbor in about 40 minutes, right?
But at that speed, your runtime is cut to just 1 to 1.5 hours. So, it is critical to reconstruct the exact speed he was traveling at during those crucial hours.
Because he would know precisely how much time he had left before the battery died, no matter his objective.
The only other factor we must consider here is that those estimates are based on a standard dinghy. But there is absolutely nothing standard about his vessel. So his actual speeds were likely much slower than that.
Explain that. Well, a rigid inflatable boat, or a rib, has a solid hull with inflatable tubes.
Because of those rubber sides, the design is highly efficient, unlike this outdated model. There is a reason the manufacturer went out of business. His boat is essentially a heavy bathtub floating in the water. Just heavy, solid fiberglass. It only weighs 120 pounds. But when you examine the bow of the craft, it lacks the deep V-shaped hull that modern inflatables use to slice through waves and get on plane.
Right.
So, his dinghy essentially plows through the water, creating massive drag, while the rest of us are actually paying close attention.
So yeah, I just do not buy it because when I looked at those numbers, I thought,
sure, maybe he was traveling fast enough in that small dinghy at 5 knots to hit another boat's wake and knock someone off balance. But he is definitely not pushing that boat that fast with so much weight on board. Right.
and if something sinister took place later, and if his entire story is a lie, he simply does not have enough time to navigate the dark waters of the Sea of Abaco in that tiny dinghy.
Even if he keeps it at half thrall,
He only gets 6 to 6.5 hours, but he has already used a chunk of that.
Remember, they had already traveled down to Tahiti Beach.
Then headed back another quarter mile, maybe half a mile, into Abaco, maneuvering in and out, and perhaps all the way back to Soulmate.
So that battery had already been draining throughout the entire day.
There is no way he had a full charge left when whatever dark event
ultimately took place aboard the Soulmate.
Now that we have cleared up the question about the battery, I want to take a closer look at the life vests.
Because when we interviewed Pete Calling, one of the first search and rescue team members to talk with Brian,
He recalled spotting 2 life jackets lying right on the dinghy floor.
So I followed up with him specifically to ask,
Pete, were those vests just lying open in the boat, or were they tucked away?
inside the forward storage compartment behind that small access door?
And he was clear. No, they were sitting right there on the floor. Then you pointed out a fascinating detail regarding Coast Guard certified life jackets.
Virtually all of them, if not every single one, feature one crucial safety item positioned right near your collar. What is it?
Exactly, a rescue whistle.
So, I have spent the last few nights trying to get clearance from everyone anchored nearby to run an acoustics test over open water, right?
Because my current position spans almost the entire stretch behind me,
which is completely blacked out right now, but that shoreline outlines the whole boundary of the Abaco Sea.
That is why I needed to test it, because I had no idea how far noise carries out here. Yet I do know you can hear a dog bark from that shoreline under the right atmospheric conditions.
Back home, I can easily hear noises carry over a mile across a calm lake.
And let me tell you, the higher the pitch of the sound, the further it cuts through.
And he has already told rescue crews exactly where he claims the incident occurred,
stating that the spot where Lynette went over was roughly 1,000 meters from their main vessel, Soulmate.
Actually, let me correct that. It was 1,000 yards. Exactly 1,000 yards.
So we are only looking at 1,000 yards.
I am absolutely certain a distress whistle carries 1,000 yards over flat water.
Exactly. So the scenario you just described with those life jackets sitting on? The floor of the boat, it simply makes no sense.
I mean, was he just drifting out there calmly, sorting through the gear in his boat?
Leaving everyone to second guess what he really did.
I mean, why pull out a life vest when you are drifting right toward the shore? It makes no sense.
But that emergency whistle is only one piece.
Then you have to look at the flares.
We have people right nearby capturing photos of the sunset.
Yet not a single camera caught a flare.
No tourist posted anything asking if they just saw some SpaceX launch.
There is absolutely nothing out there.
Which explains why, from my very first interview, back when I was thinking, find out who saw those flares, because I wanted to use that visual data to pinpoint exactly where she first went into the water. Right?
Well, now we know he knew where she fell in, and I understand this coastline much better.
But there were no flares, no whistles, despite everything he had right there.
We never received a logical explanation
for how you suddenly forgot 3 years of maritime training, especially as a United States Marine, when there is no howling wind and the ocean is not even rough.
The water was calm.
In fact, it was glass calm just a quarter mile down the beach right then.
I have reviewed the footage, and we have video proving it was perfectly still. So we can completely dismiss that whole narrative about the ocean raging. They simply were not. He could have easily jumped out, since the water where that dinghy drifted was only 4 or 5 feet deep.
There was no need to stay in the channel. That boat was not some deep draft vessel.
It only needs 6 inches of water, meaning you can hug the shoreline and take the direct route. So, he likely could have stood on the sea floor, right where this tragedy allegedly occurred. The entire story simply falls apart.
Besides, once you have been living in and navigating an area for 2 whole months,
you learn exactly where the shallow spots are to take shortcuts.
Yes.
Now, looking at the T-shape coming out of that channel, I see experienced boaters discussing this in the comments.
I get it. Some people always follow the rules and navigate strictly to the end of the marker,
heading straight out the marked route.
Sure, but those are the same safe boaters who wear life jackets and do not drink on the water.
So, almost everyone else piloting a small dinghy knows to cut the corner right around that first channel marker. Naturally, you do not know the layout on day one. Nobody expects you to.
But as soon as you watch another vessel take that shortcut, you realize how far you can push it.
Then you see a local in a flat-bottom boat cut the corner even closer to the shoreline.
But honestly, let us be completely real here. If your boat only draws 6 inches and there are 3 feet of water stretching out across the flats, you are absolutely taking that direct route.
You are. You are not heading out into the open Sea of Abaco just because a marker tells you to.
The charts show you exactly where the safe water is.
That is how most boaters handle a dinghy heading back to shore.
Honestly, that is just standard protocol for sailors, especially after living there for 2 solid months.
I must admit, when I first arrive somewhere, I stick strictly to the channel center because I cannot afford another ruined propeller.
Look, once you grind your boat propeller into the seabed just once, you learn that lesson fast.
But really, if there is one major point I want to emphasize, it is that everyone working on this investigation, or trying to help solve it,
or anyone trying to piece this puzzle together, or even just following the case,
needs to completely ignore everything Brian said
and focus on a missing person last spotted at 6:34, building from there, right?
Because I have not found one single thing that he has shared
that actually turned out to be true.
And he claims it was still light outside, which makes this whole thing worse.
In his audio message to me, he says it was 10 minutes before sunset, right before dark.
The narrative he is painting suggests we were moving
along this specific timeline, but we would have to speed through it incredibly fast.
Think about it. If you sit still for 10 minutes,
or run a video camera for 10 minutes, just to demonstrate how long that really is.
It is absolutely wild.
Seriously, once you strip out the commercials, that is basically an entire sitcom episode.
Let me tell you something else too. I actually sat right there and observed the dusk from that exact location.
And it gets dim around 7:50 or 7:55, quite dark, but it takes only 3.5 minutes to vanish.
In literally 3.5 minutes,
you transition from twilight, where visibility is fine, straight into complete darkness.
But there's still a decent window, and it was definitely not 8 o'clock yet.
Cruising all the way from the small Abaco Inn, navigating the White Sound Channel, and rounding that bend takes maybe 12 minutes max. So there is no way it would keep you out until 8 o'clock. It would not have taken you until 7:50 in the evening.
It would not even take until 7:40 at night, assuming his claim of leaving at 7:30 is true.
Supposedly he was moving, and suddenly she vanished in the dark. It makes 0 sense.
And that is exactly why I believe we must discard his entire statement, because none of it fits.
Because things do not work that way out here.
I get it. I watched your podcast episode where you sat at that restaurant and remarked,
and now it is pitch black.
But when you live out here on the water, your eyes naturally adjust as the daylight fades, right?
Now, my deck lights are switched on tonight for the first time in a week just for this interview.
But we can actually scan across the water pretty clearly, even in the dark, because our vision adapted as the sun was setting too.
So, I have reached a point now where I am done arguing about this, because the facts are simply not debatable, you know?
Right.
His entire timeline and story are physically impossible under that sun. I mean,
we can all occasionally get our calendars and clocks mixed up.
But you can't cheat the sun. It goes down exactly when it wants to go down. And when you're caught on camera and iPhone snaps are going out around 7 p.m.,
you simply cannot fake the reality of when darkness actually falls.
And that darkness doesn't fit his timeline at all.
Right.
Now, what we do on social media is my wife shares the sunset every single evening. Needless to say, we know sunsets inside and out.
If there was ever a true authority on how light fades,
It is my wife who has broadcast them nightly for the last 8 months straight.
And right after she does that,
We have custom underwater lights on our boat. She flips them on to attract the fish. But from the exact moment of sunset until it gets dark enough to switch on, those underwater beams, we have a clear 90 minutes to eat dinner.
That is her scheduled break in the routine, right?
There's still a massive window of time. Yet someone online is trying to argue with me, claiming that official charts say the sunset was at 6:34. But that doesn't matter. Sunset isn't when total darkness actually sets in.
so again, the sun goes down, but ambient light lingers until it dips deep below the horizon.
And you're absolutely correct. That window lasts about an hour to 90 minutes. So, if you are focusing on the official sunset, you're using the wrong metric.
Yet, it's fascinating to dissect what he did in his calls and his public statements.
Specifically, the sheer number of narrative breadcrumbs he dropped as pure distraction.
He mentioned an electric motor, and the internet fixated on that for a week straight.
Everyone got caught up in why his engine wouldn't start.
But then he casually slips in that his wife had the spare key inside a dry bag.
Claiming Lynette kept it in her dry bag, right?
but even if the key was aboard the vessel Soulmate, it was just as out of reach as if it were in the dry bag. It was a totally useless detail to offer, because that key was still unobtainable.
Whether it was on the boat or zipped up in her bag, it had zero relevance to the events.
His timeline is full of these bizarre discrepancies.
Like, why on earth are you explaining where your spare key was kept?
Right.
Why claim your oar snapped when your boat doesn't even have a rowing bench?
Why claim you fired an emergency flare, yet you never once blew the safety whistle?
Why tell us you used your phone's screen as a flashlight, but couldn't use it to call for help?
Yeah, I think we have reached a clear consensus
That anyone paying close attention can spot massive holes in his alibi.
While experienced mariners look at this narrative and see it leak like a sieve.
Right. And I know there are seasoned sailors out there
Who might think, look,
the ocean is unpredictable, and we don't know the exact conditions of that specific moment. And honestly, I want to give him the benefit of the doubt until you look closely at all this evidence.
It is everything.
When that story first broke, I agreed with the local mariners. We just did not know.
I am not saying his story is true or false. I am saying we just do not know.
But now, things are changing, right? Now, when he claims she fell into the Abaco Sea, and you hear that word sea, you immediately picture a massive, deep body of water like the Caribbean. But it is not. You quickly realize it is basically the Abaco bathtub, right? And honestly, I have to agree with that.
I would not even call it a lake. It is a pond.
It is incredibly shallow. Yes, just like a massive swimming pool.
It is like a giant swimming pool. And the deepest point is only about 8 feet, though high tide might push it to 15 in one spot. But it is incredibly shallow. You can see the bottom everywhere. Exactly. So, looking at this from a mariner's perspective, knowing the geography and seeing the actual footage you gathered to give us eyes on the location,
There is not a single part of his story that makes sense.
we have even tried to recreate it.
We have kept so many failed reconstruction videos private because the scenario just looks completely ridiculous on camera.
Like, both my neighbor and I are deeply committed to protecting the boating community and ensuring the islands we visit get real answers to this.
Because if people keep doing reckless things when traveling to these islands, the locals will react.
And they will simply stop letting us in.
Right.
So there is a strong personal drive to uncover the truth, and to ensure people are not afraid to go boating because of this incident.
You do not just fall off a dinghy, moving at 2 miles per hour in 4 feet of water.
especially on a night when we have both seen video of
completely calm waters.
Which is why I keep saying, the clock is ticking, Brian Hooker.
Tick-tock.
Blaine. I cannot thank you enough for tracking every single detail and bringing them to my attention.
It will take a collective effort.
But I do not believe things will end well for Brian Hooker.
That is just my personal opinion, but considering what I have uncovered alongside your findings, it does not look good.
We must help take care of Carly.
That is what Lynette would want. She left a little girl behind in this world. It is up to all of us to stand up for Lynette and protect Carly. We want justice for Lynette. Blaine, thank you. Have a good day.
I owe a massive thanks to Blaine Stevenson for helping me work through these complex questions.
Questions I was not equipped to answer, while helping me double-check the things I thought I had solved.
His insights have been invaluable, and I truly appreciate our long discussion.
It was incredibly revealing.
I have more critical updates lined up for you in our upcoming episodes.
Specifically, there is a piece of footage I need to share with you.
A private security camera was rolling, aimed directly at the Sea of Abaco.
I am going to show you exactly what we uncovered,
And what we believe we have spotted in that footage,
which we will dissect in our upcoming episodes. So, I hope you keep following this case. Make sure to subscribe so you do not miss our next update.
Thank you all for watching and listening. And remember, the truth is not just serious, it is drop-dead serious.